I'm Kate Townsend. I'm a lecturer in Exeter, and I apologise for coming in several minutes after Claire had started. My Google Maps took me to the construction site. I spent 40 minutes walking around the construction site, so do forgive me for coming in late. Right, what am I going to be talking about today? I'm going to be talking about the idea of the child's right to bodily integrity. And I'm particularly going to focus on their interest in bodily integrity. I should say that I kind of broadly agree with everything that Claire said, and also I agree kind of from a moral perspective in terms of the moral outcome in a lot of the work that Brian has done on the child's right to bodily integrity. But I want to zone in on a particular idea of the child's right to bodily integrity that I think is different to Brian's, but also Claire might disagree with, having listened to that talk. So the question is, do children have a right to bodily integrity? And if they do, what can it possibly look like? So a lot of us in the room and on the call have kind of grappled with the question of the child's right to bodily integrity in relation to particularly genital cutting and modification procedures. So that's the area I'm interested in. I've got a lot of reasons for trying to focus on or pull out an idea of the child's right to bodily integrity that emphasizes their interests. But the main ones for the purposes of this audience, I think, are I'm not entirely convinced by no consent arguments. I don't think that they adequately capture what's at stake when it comes to intervening in children's bodies. And also, I want to develop an interest-based account and defence of child's right to bodily integrity that's better able to engage with, and then I say reject, interest-based defensive of genital cutting and modification practices. So engaging in conversation with people who argue that it's in people's interest to have genital cutting and modification practices in the terms that they're discussing it. So, how do I change my slides on this one?
Yeah.
Oh, clicker.
Yes, the slides there.
Sorry. I mean, it's. Oh, right, let's see. I did slideshow.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to,
There we go.
Oh, okay. All right, good. So essentially the central argument is the children have a right to bodily integrity that's grounded in their interest in bodily integrity. The broader context for this argument is a normative universalism. I'm going to take a normative universal position when it comes to a commitment to the principle of bodily integrity for children. That is, I'm committed to the idea that it should be universally applied and it transcends differences between children, be they cultural, religious, geographical, or sex trait category. Whatever the differences between children, our commitment to the principle of bodily integrity should transcend those differences. Nonetheless, I recognise that people are, of course, different and hold different values and preferences. There should, I want to insist, be a universally applied commitment to this principle of bodily integrity. Further, the practical real-world context of this argument is that we live in a world with complex competing interests. Some of them are culturally and socially specific. Some of them are unique to individuals within those contexts, and some that are universal, or we can say that they're universal. Within a complex picture of that kind, we can permit and imagine all kinds of interests that come into conflict and tension. And we can commit all kinds of actions in relation to different interests. For instance, interests related to an individual's preferences to write a novel or to go surfing. We might have interests related to our particular cultural setting, cultural group, that are group-based interests, or we have universal and basic interests, which I'll say a bit more about later on. Also within this kind of background, I want to say that there are normative priority rules. And the priority rules for this piece are, or what I'm presenting, a child-centered approach to children's rights. So I'm going to be focusing on the child for the purposes of my account. A commitment to equal protection from physical harm, and a commitment to the principle of bodily integrity. So when I'm talking about the principle of bodily integrity, I think rather like Claire, I'm thinking of the idea that our bodies are, they're not our properties, they're not simply our properties, they are us. We are in and experience the world through our bodies. Every encounter we have, every preference we develop occurs with and through our bodies. That means they have profound normative significance for us as individuals, but they should also be considered as profoundly normatively significant by the law and by our other people within the empirical environment. I'm going to say a little bit about, and this was, it was nice to hear Marie's response, because she was saying, I think we need to think more about who the child is and what we understand the child to be. And this is an account of the child as white bearer, because I do think there is a problem in not all, but a lot of the literature, where we kind of tend to treat children as either the parent's property or as a subset of being an adult, rather than zoning in on them as unique individuals in themselves. So I want to say that the child, as right bearer, has these particular qualities. They are distinct and particular embodied people, just like the adults in the room. They're in a condition of becoming autonomous. So I want to note that I don't think of them as pre-autonomous, I don't think of them as non-autonomous. They're in a condition of becoming autonomous, by which I mean, as they experience the world, as they are encountered by adults, they are cultivating their capacity for autonomy. That's not something that switches on. We don't just switch on our autonomy when we become 16 or 17 or whatever. It's something that emerges relationally as we experience the world. A baby who cries and begins to learn that a parent or a caregiver comes to them is developing something like what will later be an autonomous understanding of the world, because they are learning that if they make a noise, someone comes, or they might not, they might, in tragic cases, learn that nobody comes. But they learn that there's a response to their actions in the world. When a child throws a ball against a wall and it bounces back, they're learning about how their actions affect the world and how the world then responds to them. So it's a normatively significant period of time in which an individual develops their capacity for autonomy. And 3, children are profoundly vulnerable to harm by others. We can distinguish, of course, physical harms from psychological harms. I'm particularly interested in physical harms, which can include cutting, interference, penetration of the body, but also hitting, like the example Claire gave earlier. So they're significantly different to adults in these ways. Well, they're distinct in particular embodied persons, just like adults, but 2 and 3 make them significantly difficult to most adults. And that means that their rights need to be different, and their right to bodily integrity needs to be different. So I want to focus on their interest in bodily integrity, and to suggest that a more plausible way of thinking about children's rights is to emphasize their interests rather than their choices or their will, because the default position in law tends to be that children are unable to consent to things. They can express wants, they can express desires, but they can't consent in the way that we assume adults can. So having a choice-based right is philosophically problematic, and I would say practically problematic, because we just assume that children aren't able to make choices that would make interventions with their bodies permissible. And the no consent arguments that I think dominate the literature on arguing against child pattern practices tend to rely on, or tend to be, I think, this choice or will character of rights, and I think that that's problematic. So I'm pulling on Joel Feinberg's work on harm and distinguishing welfare interests from ulterior interests. Welfare interests are basic and fundamental for survival and living, and universal, I will claim. Ulterior interests are particular to personal projects and goals. So welfare interests involve fundamental requirements for surviving, existing, living, and they're common to all people. So these interests refer to the interests that are fundamental for day-to-day functioning, such as access to clean water, having shelter in the cold and rain, having food, and having bodily integrity. So this first category of interests is basic and universal, and it's in their interests whatever the contextual kind of circumstances of their lives. We can probably imagine some exceptions, but generally speaking, everybody has a basic interest in food, shelter, bodily integrity. That's the thing. Ulterior interests then correspond to more developed and particular preferences, and it's that kind of interest that enables a person to follow their personal projects or goals. For instance, the aspiring writer, we can say they have an interest in developing their writing skills, and so attending a writing retreat or going on a novel writing course. Those things are in their interest. They're particular. They're important to that individual person for realizing their life goals, but they're particular to the individual. Being basic and universal and fundamental for advancing and developing ulterior interests, welfare interests take priority within a system of rights and competing interests. So this is if we're thinking about the best interests argument, the claim is that we can't say that that's an objective interest, but it should take moral priority over interests that are related to kind of personal life plans. So the child as right bearer, if we recall, distinct and particular embodied persons, condition of becoming autonomous and profoundly vulnerable to harm by others. These kind of ideas correspond to the first claim that we should be universally committed to their bodily integrity as a welfare interest, equal and universal. The second condition is also universal in that all children, if they become autonomous in and through their bodies as they're growing and learning about the world. But it's also particular and contextual, because every individual child is raised within a particular setting. So it's a platform or a medium for their development of ulterior interests. And three, the profoundly vulnerable to harm generates a duty to protect and care for children that transcends difference between them. So this interest-based argument for child genital cutting to respond to interest-based arguments for child genital cutting in and modification, I want to say that stressing and prioritising the interest in bodily integrity as a welfare interest helps to respond to these thinkers who might claim either that it's in a child's interest to enhance their sense of belonging to a particular cultural or religious group, but also people who might argue that it's in a child's interest, an intersex child's interest, to have their genitalia modified in order to conform to a societal expectation about bodies looking like they fit the medical sex trait binary. So I would claim that those interests, the conformity to a religious community, conformity to a cultural group, conformity to the sex trait binary, correspond to ulterior interests, and they are normatively secondary to the general welfare interest in bodily integrity. So I pointed out that I don't think the child's right to bodily integrity can have the same character as an adult's right to bodily integrity, and we need to think about the child as distinct, having equal, as their own equal, if not more, moral consideration than their adult counterparts. But their rights, we can't just imagine an adult's rights and then sort of imprint it onto a child. We have to think through who the child is, what their experiences are, and how their right can correspond to that.